This lesson is visual linear perspective. We're not going to be using rulers. We're going to try and look at the objects and visualize the angles and interpret that and draw that on our paper. For this lesson, you'll need your 18 by 24 inch sketch paper. You'll need a General's 2H extra hard charcoal pencil. You could also use an HB for this. You'll use the Nitram HB charcoal stick. You could also use the B, that would be fine. And you will use a kneaded eraser. The still life in this lesson is comprised of wooden blocks, essentially. If you're setting up your own still life, you can use blocks like this, children's blocks, boxes, gift boxes, cardboard boxes. You're also welcome to draw from this still life. Before we begin, I'm going to show you a few things that might help you as you draw. So this still life has 4 cubes, 3 of which are facing the same direction, which means it has parallel planes. So if you keep that in mind and think about what's parallel to each other, it'll make it a little easier to draw. So for instance, all of these lines essentially, or parts of these cubes, will stay parallel to each other. The same can be said for these lines on all of these cubes. The same thing holds true for the vertical lines. The verticals of this cube will also be parallel because everything is going to stay vertical. We don't have any cubes that are tipped. This guy, he is skewed differently, but in his own space, those angles are going to remain parallel. The same for these angles. They're going to remain parallel. If you keep that in mind as you draw and try to create those lines and angles parallel to each other, you'll be able to create this illusion of three-dimensionality. I'm going to begin this drawing with an envelope just to get a guideline for the size that I want to end up with, the height and the width of the drawing. The envelope is really rough. It's an approximation of what we'll be drawing, and we'll be erasing it as we go along. So draw it lightly. I'm going to begin with the white cube, and I'm doing a simple block-in just to see whether this guideline is going to be big enough and to get everything in the right place. This is not going to be accurate in regards to angles and lines. I'm going to look at what I'm doing and begin thinking about that, but I want to do a simple block-in just to get things in place and to draw the objects where I think they're going to be and the size I want them, and then I will refine that. You can see I'm ignoring the fact I have a black cube here. I know that this cube, this white cube I'm drawing, goes behind that, so I can just use my knowledge of how things work to draw behind and what's invisible to me. Again, this is just the basic block-in, so I'm not worrying about accuracy. Keep in mind that the block-in is essentially a rough sketch. You'll be drawing on top of it, you'll be adjusting it, erasing it. It's a way to get the whole still life on your paper without worrying too much about angles and things like that. You do want to think about where the objects are placed and how big they are, but don't worry too much about being precise or accurate with it. It's just a way for us to begin this drawing without having to labor over it too much. All right, so we're going to start refining this and looking at all of the angles and the lines. So I'm going to begin with the large white square. And the first thing I'm going to try and do is to put that vertical line in that's nearest to me. And then I'm going to work from there. As I draw, I'm constantly looking at my still life. I'm comparing the lines I'm drawing to the lines I see on my still life, to the angles that I'm seeing on the still life. I erase, I move the lines around, I adjust. It's a constant push and pull of adjusting and fixing, comparing. You can use your charcoal pencil to compare your lines to see if they're parallel. Just lay the pencil on your paper and compare the two lines. So here I'm doing quite a bit of adjusting, changing the angles of these lines at the top of the cube. They don't feel right, they don't look right, so I'm erasing, changing, adjusting. Blockin is just a guideline. I can see this block actually needs to come forward, so I'm going to draw it much farther forward. I'm comparing the size of this block to the size of this block. I can see that the small mahogany block is about half the size of the large white cube, so I want my drawing to reflect that. Look at how the small mahogany cube and the white cube are touching. Their back edges are in line with each other. I'm using that information to help me draw them. You can see I'm beginning to work on the brown block, but I'll only draw one side before moving on to the skewed cube. I shouldn't have started the brown block at all. It'll be easier to draw when I have the skewed cube done, as the brown block is behind everything else. I'm erasing this and just leaving a bit of a ghost of it so that I can not be too much distracted by it. So I can see that this block sits at an angle on here, and I can see that the white block goes behind it. So I know that this corner comes forward of the back of here. So that's where I'm going to begin. Now I'm comparing this angle to this one to try and see this wedge shape here, the negative space between this and this. As I work on this, I'm constantly comparing the angles I'm drawing to the angles on the skewed cube and the still life. So I'm flicking my eyes back and forth from the cube and the still life to my drawing. You can see that the angles I've drawn are not heading in the same direction as the angles on the skewed cube and the still life. Now after I've adjusted it, it's better, but it's still off. My goal with this isn't perfection, so I'm going to leave this and move on, but I'm constantly trying to see the angles and interpret what I see. In order to draw the tall brown rectangular block, I visually measure it, meaning that I look at my still life and think about how far the top of the brown block is above the skewed cube. And then I draw a vertical line to where I think that will be on my paper. And then I compare what I've drawn to the still life and ask myself, does that look right? Does it feel tall enough? And I adjust my line until it looks and feels right to me. Then I continue on, drawing the remaining angles of the top, comparing parallels as I go. I can see this cube is too squat, so now I'm going to adjust that. So this is as far as we're going to go with this. And you can see this is not perfect. Really, none of these cubes are perfect. This lesson isn't about perfection. It's about learning to freehand draw objects in perspective. It's also about training your eye to see how three-dimensional objects move away from you in space, which then allows you to be able to draw that illusion of dimensionality onto paper. So don't worry about your drawing being perfect. Try to start to see these shapes. Does this look like a big rectangle? Does this look like a cube? Does this look like a cube? It's about interpreting what you're seeing and to try and draw what you're seeing.